I now pronounce you exclusive. Let's talk about exclusive brokerage agreements. I would make the mistake by assuming everyone knows the proper way to engage in agency, but from the broker side of the table, we are running into, and Tom will probably attest to this as well, we are running into people turning in their contracts ready to go to closing, or they've already closed. That's the worst. And there's no brokerage agreement of any sorts, yet on the purchase and sale agreement, agents are checking the box that we were working, we meaning the brokerage and yourself, working with this person or couple or whatever it is as a client. And we need to be careful with that, because once there's a problem and we have to review your file, we need to know what position we are in order to proceed. And most agents tend to work with people as a customer, but they behave like they're representing a client, and vice versa. So what I want to do is go over some key forms. And before I do that, I want to open the floor, because this is called Broker Chat. My name's Deborah Blue. I'm the managing broker in the Midtown office. We do this twice a month, and Tom and I alternate. You know, sometimes both of us are on the call, sometimes it's just one, but this is a platform for you and all the 6 offices to come on and ask your burning questions. So before I jump into the different types of agency, did anyone have a burning question about agency or anything else? So that we don't run out of time, I want you to have your time. No, who is that? I don't know who that is.
Like a customer. Oh, hi, this is Selena Evans from KW in town. The topic is timely because I was talking about, hi. We'd love to hear a little bit more recap on customer agreements and what we can and cannot do. Because I had an interesting conversation with a client yesterday and that came up.
Okay, all right, we'll talk about that. I have that on the agenda. Anyone else? No? All right, we'll get started so I can get you out of here on time. So let me share my screen. Please someone let me know if you can see it, because you know Deborah loves a slide deck.
You can, yes, and we appreciate it. We definitely appreciate it.
Because you can take pictures of it, and then I sent a handout out Friday and today or yesterday for them to put that in the chat for you guys to be able to follow along. If you don't have that, I'll stick it in there, you know, before we close out today. All right. So I always like to say, even the slightest mistake can end up costing you money, stress, and a tarnished reputation. So if we follow the rules of our contracts, you will see that it will keep you out of check jail. It'll keep you out of the broker's office, or as you guys lovingly call it, the principal's office. And it will keep a smile on the face of your customers and clients. The following forms, now we're not going to go into detail on all of these forms, but I wanted you to see the most used brokerage agreements if you're just a residential agent on this call, and even probably if you're commercial, but the forms will say commercial. But for the most part, for the majority that are probably on this Zoom today, these are the main brokerage agreement forms you will use throughout your career, okay? And we're going to break down the ones that are highlighted. The others, the reason I'm not going to go too much into leasing, because there's a smaller percentage of agents that do a lot of leasing and tenant agreements, but I will touch on some of the things that I'm seeing on the broker side of the table that you just need to be careful with. All right. So does anybody remember BRRETA when you were in pre-license? And probably if you got your broker's license, that was very heavy in getting your broker's license as well, as far as a topic. BRRETA means every relationship, every, not some, not every now and again, every relationship in which a real estate broker, that would be you, that would be me, that's all of us that have a license. When we act or represent with a customer or client, we must have some agency agreement of some sort. When you do, now, it is true, you do not have to have a signed agreement to create that agency, but it is a Georgia law that we must disclose who we are and how we're going to work with that person. And the best thing to use, in my opinion, that would solve all of that before you put any kind of brokerage agreement in front of whomever you're about to work with, whether it's a listing, a seller, or a buyer, is the CB01. CB means consumer brochure, and it's the first one. There's a reason it's the first one. They would like us to talk about agency before we talk about anything else. The ABCs of agency and understanding the brokerage agreement. What I teach in contract class is to take all of these brochures and put them in a zip file so that when you're having your consultation with your seller or your buyer, or you're sending them the brokerage agreement if they would like to look it over first, include this agency packet. Make a buyer's packet, make a seller's packet, and it should be in both. Therefore, you would be able to explain it to them as well as give this to them. Now, this is the whole form that you're looking at, but it explains every single agency that we allow in Georgia. We do not do, write it down again for the people in the back, sub-agency. And there are some market centers that will allow dual agency, but there's no such thing, and I still in 2022 keep hearing this, that it's against the law for dual agency. It is not, let me say it again for the people in the back, it is not against the law. Your broker might have a policy in the office to say, we do not allow dual agency. So because we have several different market centers and maybe some guests that are from other offices or other market centers, you will check with your broker as to whether that is allowed. Any questions about this packet, this brochure?
Just to confirm, you're saying that the agency of Keller Williams that we fall under, your brokerage, Deborah, we don't do dual agency.
I've never said that. Now,
okay.
now Tom might change that,
I'm sorry.
but that's allowed in Midtown, the dual agency.
But we don't do sub-agency.
We don't do sub-agency. Sub-agency, in case you've forgotten, not you, but specifically the Zoom class, think of, if you're from California, if you're on this call, a lot, I'll use that state because I know that one off the top of my head. That's when the brokerage will allow different agencies to be in the front yard. So you might see a Caldwell Banker sign, you might see a Century 21 sign, you might see a Keller Williams sign. And they cross over into other brokerages, but that has to be with the permission of the qualifying brokers, and they do behave that way in California. We don't do that here. And I'm glad. That would be a hot mess and a broker's nightmare. So I would just say the reason I put this form up is that this is good practice. It can be found in your group of GAR forms, and it is the ABCs of agency under the consumer brochure section. So let's start with the, and by the way, did they put the forms in chat for you guys, the handout?
They did the ABCs of agency, unless someone saw something else.
Well, if you scroll down, it's all, everything that I'm about to go over, it's the whole packet. It's all one PDF.
Okay.
Because it might be too small to see what's on the screen, what I'm going to talk about, and it doesn't have all the forms. All right, so let's talk about the seller brokerage agreement. This was changed this year and a little bit of last year when we all remember when this practice just started popping up, that if you show my listing, or if you don't show my listing, I'm only going to pay you 1%. And it was a lot of hubbub and a lot of why is that and so on and so forth. And it's still a problem. I still see it in the MLS. I don't know where that practice came from. I don't know why what ballroom they went to and learned how to do this, but I don't think it's very, as the word is in MLS, co-op, that's a derivative of the word cooperation. And it's already hard enough to do real estate out here with all the forms and the laws and the craziness, making it difficult, especially for those of you that are heavy in buyers. you want to be paid a fair commission. And Tom has spoken about that numerous times, you know, because he doesn't believe in this, I'm going to do the 1%, and I don't either, 1%, pay a decent commission because it's tough. I actually was working with a buyer this weekend. I'm very rusty. I started in Cobb and we went all the way to Beaufort. So I'm a little bit cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs today because I haven't taken a buyer out in 2 years. I've been mainly focused on sellers. So this was a past client. So of course I'm going to work with my past client and I will refer out next time. So between the traffic, the heat, and the crazy changes, you guys can have that one. All right, so seller brokerage engagement. You'll see I have highlighted number 2 because that's an important situation there. We always put the price and the list date of when you go to that listing appointment, you're expecting to walk out of the door with this listing agreement signed. And so that is your beginning and your end of your listing agreement. However, there are instances where the seller says, what I'd like to paint, I'd like to clean up, or maybe you made some suggestions and it cannot quite go on the market. So therefore, but you want to walk out the door with this. So what we did in the past before this section was changed, we would get it signed and then just not put it in MLS until they were ready. We would predate it, you know, different things like that to go. So the contract committee fixed that for us. Look, we want to give you a contract that you walk in, they love you, you sign it, but your marketing date may not, to the consumers, might not start for 10 more days or 20 more days or whatever the case may be. So then coming soon became a big thing. And that was abused. It's still abused, but they've tried to organize it a little bit better. Now, a broker question that I typically get with this agreement is, okay, Deborah, we're not going to start until August, I don't know, 15th or August 30th. Can I do coming soon? Can I do this? Can I do that? What the consumer brochure says that I've just previously showed you is that you will always lean towards what your brokerage policy or your MLS policy is. Okay, because keep in mind that brochure is a broad brochure because we have several MLS systems in the state of Georgia. We've got Savannah, we've got Macon, we've got all different systems. So in FMLS, they tell us we have to have a signed listing agreement, exclusive only, in MLS within 48 hours. And if you know you're not going to have it in there within 48 hours, then you are a coming soon. Okay, so you would have a commencement date under number 3 where your marketing would start. You're going to put number 2 where your beginning, your end, and then your marketing tells you when it's going to start. If it's going to start within 48 hours of you signing it, you're probably not going to fill out anything in the marketing section because it's going to go to market in the next 48 hours. Okay, now for those of you that do a lot of things for your listings like I do, there's photography, there's videography, there's flyers, there's brochures, there's this, there's 3D, there's, you know, floor plans. Sometimes all of that takes at least a week. So then you probably want to put we're starting this listing with you and the brokerage, and then I'm going to need at least a week to get all of my marketing materials. You need a week to declutter. Then you're going to use section 3. Now, the very last line, which is probably hard to read on this, what it says is that in the event, let's say you give yourself a week, you give your seller a week, but everything is done within 3 or 4 days. This last section of this first page says you can start it early. You don't have to wait the entire week. You can say, you know what, I got my brochures, the photographer was available, we got all the pictures back. Most photographers get pictures back same day, if not the one that I work with, I can get them in 24 hours. But because they do a lot of enhancement and SEO and all that, you know, stuff. So at the end of the day, when you fill this out, it's to give you time to prepare. This is not a time, here's where the abuse happens, to try to sell it off market. That's the abuse. Okay, it's not a time to sell it off market. We have a form for that. All right. So any questions about the seller brokerage agreement?
Hey, good afternoon again, Deborah. Willie Nelson.
Hey, Willie.
And just to be clear, because I know I've had conversations with other agents about this, when we have the agreement and we have the date of the agreement, we can actually accept offers during not accept. I mean, we can receive offers at that time, but we cannot accept it until it has been publicly listed for the
Correct.
general public to be able to have access to it.
We have to make it public to the consumer because of the word exclusive. I now pronounce you exclusive. I put that little cute tagline to give you guys something to remember, that if you aren't making a commitment and putting a ring on it, okay, you shouldn't be accepting any offers before the start date. All right, so yes, Willie, that is correct. You can accept offers coming in, but you're going to need to, at the presentation or the listing consultation, let the seller know, look, we're going to be doing coming soon, and we may even get offers. We can't accept any of those offers until the day you go live. And in the last 2 years with low inventory, well, we still have it low inventory, but in the last 2 years with the frenzy of standing in line to get into one house and there's 119 people, you know, lined up in the street, the consumer's a little pissed off that they didn't get a chance to see it. I had an instance where I watched a listing that was coming soon. I knew we were going to make an offer on it, was trying to make an appointment to see it that morning. I went to bed at midnight, and when I got up, it was under contract. Okay, nothing happened between midnight and 7 a.m. That's good. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how they were able to show the property, write a contract, and be under contract by 7 a.m. It didn't happen. And when I looked at the under contract, it was an in-house deal. So it never, as far as I'm concerned, it never went to market. It didn't even register as 1 day. It registered as 0. So that tells you it was done between that midnight and I'll be quite honest with you, looking at MLS, I just listed a coming soon and we're under contract now. But when I looked at it at midnight, it still did not flip over. I thought it flipped over at midnight. I'm not sure what time it flips over, but it did not flip over at midnight to say active. But by morning, it was active. So I don't know, between 12 and whatever I got up that day, it was not active. So just know that you can accept offers. You can receive offers. You cannot accept an offer until it officially, I don't care how much pressure your seller puts on you, you cannot do it. Okay, so you need to be firm about that too. When you explain things to people and why, they don't push back. Okay, now if you have the form right there in front of you that was placed in the chat, on page 2 of the agreement, at the top of the page, I don't have a slide for that, so you'll need to look at your handout. We talk about the commission. This is where the problem was happening, where you would go to your listing appointment, agree on a commission, agree on how much you're offering to the other co-op agent, and that's what goes into the MLS system. But what agents were doing, they were putting in the private remarks, if you don't show it, I'm going to pay you 1%. And we had no way of proving, did the seller even know that? Well, we've learned that that's the case. The seller didn't know that. They show up at closing, they see their agent receiving, 5% and you're getting 1%. For some, they don't care. For others, they're like, well, I want to offer a fair commission so that I get agents looking at my home. And that is what I agreed with you. Okay, and then whatever was discussed behind closed doors, oh, well, they didn't show it and they're whatever they told the seller. And the seller was like, okay, I guess that's the way we do things. No, it's not the way we do things. So now if someone says, you don't show the property, you're only going to get 1%, that needs to be in the listing agreement. The seller needs to understand that, oh, by the way, I'm giving you 6% to go out there and market my home, and whatever agreement you have with the seller, you get the whole 6, or you're going to drop it to 5, or whatever your thing is. All the seller knows is that you're offering whatever to the other agent. But if that agent doesn't show it and their listing agent has to show your client or your customer, then you're only going to pay them 1. The seller has to agree to that. That's not something you just sneak in private remarks and bully the other person to taking, okay? Now, let's say you are on that end, you are the buyer, and you're curious about, well, first of all, you need to be showing your clients and customers. Don't leave that up to someone. Now, if you work with me, I always tell you, you're protected because my job is to do what? Sell that house. And if you are out sick or on vacation and they up and find it, and I don't have a problem showing it. You're just gonna make sure you do all the other work, but I don't have a problem showing because that's my job. That's what I told the seller I would do. Bring ready, willing, and able buyers. So stop with all the fighting with everybody like you do this and you, it's called co-op, derivative of cooperation, okay? So when you fill out the commission side, you wanna make sure if there's going to be a change or variable change to that commission, if the co-op agent doesn't do something, it has to be in writing now in that section 4. Okay, let's jump down to protected period. This is another thing that seems to be confusing. And this, when I talk about this, this is across the board on all the other brokerage agreements we're going to go over that have protected periods. When you list a property or you show a buyer a property, you are putting a protected period saying, if this expires, I'm protected 90 days, 180 days, whatever. Seth Weissman, who is a co-counsel to our board and does a lot of help with the contract committee, authoring our contracts and legalese and things like that. Recently on the video from his YouTube channel said that, or no, it was a class I went to. He suggested that we stop putting 30 days, 90 days, and we start putting 1 to 2 years. When an attorney tells you to do that, it's because there have been lawsuits. It's because there have been some issues that he feels that mindset needs to change. So I'm not encouraging you to put 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 90 days. I'm just saying, think about what is your protected period. You know how much time you've spent with a buyer or a seller, and sometimes they can be tricky. So the reason the protected period is there, what it means is during the time that you're listed with that buyer or that seller, you're protecting your rights that if I've shown you this house or I've listed this house and a buyer comes back, you're still seller gonna pay me the commission. Here's where there's the misunderstanding. When a seller fires you or the agreement expires and they list with a new brokerage, all bets are off. Protected period's over. I don't care if it's the same agent that brought their buyer to your listing during the time that you were the agent, and now there's a different firm and that same agent, that buyer come back, you're no longer in play. Does everybody understand that? Because that for some reason seems to be a misunderstanding. The protected period doesn't go on, you know, in perpetuity, okay? It does, that's not how it works. It ends. If the seller doesn't list with someone, a brokerage, not for sale by owner, a brokerage, and then you at the someone previous that you worked with, which you should be able to prove by looking at your lockbox, then you can go back to the seller and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm still in my protected period, and Susie and her client, James, have come back and written a contract. Then you're going to need to make a call to the broker, okay? The first thing you want to do is make a call to the seller because you have the agreement with the seller. Please don't put that in the lap of the broker because you have the relationship. And regardless if it was a good relationship or you were fired or whatever the case may be, you still want to talk to them and say, look, I just want to remind you that we did have an agreement. There is a protective period. And in the event this person comes back, you're still going to have to pay this commission because guess what? The seller didn't read it. They don't understand it. And if you're not going over it with them, you're just going in saying, yay, I got a listing, sign here. Then that's where the problem and the miscommunication happens. Questions? Comments? Don't care.
Miss Deborah, I do. Could you just repeat? I want to make sure that I understand that clearly. If they change brokerages, even if it's the same agent, you said, and they just go to a different brokerage, then the protective period does not matter?
Right, let me say it one more time. You listed a property and it expires, but you've got a 90-day protected period. Your seller doesn't list with any other brokerage, Coldwell Banker, Redfin, Compass, doesn't list with any other brokerage. But a buyer and that agent that came in and looked at your listing 2 weeks ago decided, you know what, it's expired now, but I think I like that house. That agent calls the seller direct and says, hey, can we come back through? Seller says, come on back through. And I feel like, I know it doesn't happen, I feel like the right thing to do is to call the agent. When I see an expired listing, I still call that agent, because I want them to take care of their side. I know most agents are like, well, there's no agent now, so I can get more money, or the seller says I can save some money, or the buyer says there's no agent. Everybody thinks they can save money. We can only save, only one person's saving, okay? All three people are not saving, all right? Or all three sides are not saving. So what I do the right thing and just call the agent, and they'll either tell me, Deborah, I'm done with that seller, you just go direct to them, or, hey, I'll call the seller. I let that agent decide, okay? Because they've got the direct phone number versus me skip tracing and looking for them and everything. So to answer your question, if you have the listing, it expires, you still have a protected period, and please make sure you always give a protected period, because if you have no protected period and you come to your broker, SOL, okay? And so then a buyer and their agent, they come back. They've been in there before while you had it listed, they come back. You are still entitled to a commission. But if the seller says, listing expired, I don't think I want to go with Keller Williams, I'm going to go with, Acme Realty, your protected period, no matter, it is no longer in play. Is that clear as mud or no?
Yes, ma'am. Got it.
And
Anyone else?
yes, this is Tamala. You can do a protective period past the expiration date of the contract. Can you not?
That's what the protected period is.
Yeah. Okay.
The protected period is beyond the listing time frame.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So there are a lot of us out here, me included, that sell a lot of things that never even hit FMLS, because I prospect and then I already know I have a buyer because I'm prospecting for specific types of people or things. And when I talk to the seller and I'm like, you know what, I can get you a cash offer. Let me call my, investor or whatever. So if that happens, if you go to F107 in your packet, that's called the authorization. Look at, it's very clear. Authorization to show a what? An unlisted property, not an exclusive, but authorization to say, I'm bringing specific people into your home. And because I'm doing that, you will pay me a commission. You cannot use an authorization to show an unlisted property, and here's where the abuse is with this form, and put it in FMLS for 10 days to try to find a buyer. Now, I don't think anybody on this call is doing that, but the others, okay? And I know that to be true because we've had that in our office and they're no longer with our office, okay? So when you use this form, that means you found a for sale by owner, and hopefully a lot of you are doing this, looking for your own inventory when you've exhausted MLS and you're prospecting by phone or postcards or door knocking, and someone says, you bring me a buyer, I'll work with you. That's the time that you can, and if they tell you, I don't want to list, here's an alternative, okay, to find a buyer for their house. But don't lie to them and say you have a buyer. Have a buyer. So when I use this form, I have a buyer. It doesn't mean the buyer is going to make an offer. It doesn't mean the buyer is going to buy it. It just means that seller gave me permission to bring Keller offers, my own investor list. Maybe there's a specific buyer I'm looking for. And I list all of those people in this area right here because it says prospective buyers or tenants. Okay, so depending on whether this is an authorization to show a property that the person is trying to find a tenant. And you go, I've got a tenant for that. Then you would use this form. All right. And right at the bottom, you can't see it on the slide, but in your handout, I highlighted commission. So when you talk to this unlisted homeowner, you're going to negotiate a commission. So what happens to us, we always get, I don't want to list, but if you bring me a buyer, I'll pay you 3%. Great, I've got one stiletto in the door. Okay. And so if they've already said yes to 3%, remember, we have a buyer brokerage. You've also told the buyer brokerage that if the seller doesn't pay me what is customary to my commission fee, then you'll pay the difference. So the seller might end up paying 3, and I might tell the buyer they have to pay 1. Or I tell the buyer, you don't have to pay anything, the seller's going to pay me. It's just however you're running your business. I'm just giving you ideas and the proper way to use this form. This form is not to bamboozle sellers signing this and then putting it in MLS trying to look for a buyer. Okay, and I'm hearing some horror stories on the street, not by agents, I don't think. I think it's done by wholesalers where people are getting real leery to sign because they're finding liens are being put on their house because the wholesaler is doing some weird stuff and then saying, now you owe me $100,000. I don't know what that little scam is, but I've heard it twice now. So something's going on out there in the streets. All right. Any questions about the authorization to show an unlisted property? Everybody understands how to use that form. And the only thing that can go in MLS is an exclusive, not an authorization. Okay. All right, let's move on then. Buyer brokerage. So if you've got your buyer brokerage form, this changed a little bit this year as well. And when you first, let's say buyer James calls and says, hey, Deborah, I saw your listing. I'd like to see it, blah-de, blah-de, blah-de. Well, the first thing I'm going to say to them is, are you being represented by anyone? They may tell you no. Great. I will ask one more question. Not only will I ask, are you being represented? I will then ask, did you sign anything? Because for some reason, people don't understand, are you being represented? Because they could have signed something, but not feel like they're being represented. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Okay. And the reason I say that is because brokers get calls saying, I don't think James had my best interest. So they may have, that person may have in their mind, you're not really representing them, but yeah, they did sign something. So then when I ask that question, then I find out they have a buyer's brokerage out there. Let me say this to you. You cannot cross listing agreements. You cannot cross buyer agreements. Let me say it for the people in the back. You cannot cross a listing agreement and you cannot tell someone how to get out of it. You tell them to read their form and call the broker. Okay, that is the proper way to handle that. Don't say, well, you know, if you just go ahead and cancel it, and just, that is a violation and will get you in trouble. All right, you call the broker and tell them to read the form that they've signed. Can a seller and a buyer get out of their agreement? Yes, in writing, whether it's an email to us or they, you know, write it longhand and shove it under the door of the brokerage. Yes, they can do that, but we have to have it in writing. It's not just call, complain, and say, I want to be out. Send it to me in writing, and then we can do that. When a buyer asks to get out of their transaction, or a seller asks to get out of their transaction, I know every situation is different. Do not hold people hostage. All that does is get you bad reviews, more stress. And I find that people are like, well, no, if you don't do this, I'm not going to release you, and so on and so forth. I just think that's bad practice. If someone is done with you, you need to be done with them. Now, I know there are different circumstances. I'm just saying overall, because then brokers get the call saying, I've tried to call Susie 5 times because I no longer want to work with her and I need to get out of this agreement. I just think that looks bad on the part of us as realtors. I just do. You may disagree with me, but why do you want to work with somebody who doesn't want to work with you? Out of principle? Look, one door closes, 2 more open. If you're new in this business, 1 door closes, 2 more open. If you keep holding on to the doorknob because you don't want them to leave, The others are going in and out and you're missing it. Okay, so if someone says I want out, let them out. All right, so when you work with buyers, you want to make sure you put the term on there. This is supposed to be done before you do anything. Now, you might say to the buyer, I'm going to give you a freebie and we're going to go look at that particular house. But by law, I have to explain in Georgia how I represent you. Right now, you're just a customer. But after I show you this property, I'd like to sit down with you and do a little consultation on how I work, find out your needs, especially if this is not the right house for you. Okay, that is a script if you didn't hear it, and I've been using it for, as of last week, 26 years. Okay, so I want you to read this if you've never read it. You're going to put the term, which is what I've highlighted under number 2. I've already explained that we do all agencies except sub-agency, and for some reason, you're not reading this sentence, but the sentence says the following types of agency not, notice it's in caps and bold, not included would be sub-agency. And we're getting forms that say designated tool. And I'm like, no, we do designated. Everyone on this call is designated if we co-op together because Tom is our qualifying broker. And it's based on the qualifying broker, not the managing broker. Okay, so if you co-op with anyone in the heart of Atlanta, that's designated. If you co-op with someone in the East Cobb or West Cobb office, that's just regular. You represent the buyer and somebody else represents the seller. Okay, and so in the event that if we offer dual agency, this is new as of this year, I believe. If we offer dual agency in the market center, you still have to get permission to make sure the seller wants or the buyer wants you to be in that position. And that's on both the seller exclusive agreement and the buyer's agreement. So these two boxes, it says that it's allowed or not allowed. And you've got to check that box. And I'm finding that in compliance in our office, it's Darcy Watts. And it comes up all the time that people miss this section because it's new. You're so used to going to section 2, marking sub-agency, and you keep going. You got to check B. There's 2 boxes right here that you have to check that you are doing it or you're not doing it. So slow down, look at it, and make sure you discuss that with the buyer or the seller, whether they're going to allow you to do that. And they don't know if they are going to allow you to do it until you explain it. So explain what that means, what that looks like. You might be on a team, and that's dual agency because you've got a team lead on that team. Okay, and it might be easier for you to do dual agency because the team lead might have the listing and you're bringing the buyer to your own listing in your team. That's still dual agency. Okay, now compensation. This is where you talk about, hey buyer, typically the seller is going to pay me when it's in the MLS system. There's something there that will compensate me. However, my commission in the event that the seller doesn't pay me, you know, or the seller's only paying, let's say 2%, and you tell them, you know, I typical, no standards, don't use the word standard, learn to use, keep saying it in the mirror, typical. What I typically get is 3%. Seller's gonna pay me 2, and our buyer's broker says 3, but I'm gonna give you a discount today and you can just pay 1. And now you've got your 3% or whatever the numbers are, and however you want to say that. Okay. Or you might say, I'm not going to ask you to pay anything. I'll accept the 2%. But I want you to understand the language and understand why you're saying this in this particular section. Any questions about that? Any problems with that? No? All righty. Agreement to work with buyer as a customer. So we had someone ask about a customer. So typically, there's a lot here to unpack that maybe you don't know or didn't know, or maybe you did know. Basically, the form still looks the same. You're going to have a term for the customer. You're going to tell them what agency is allowed, and you're going to tell them in the event the seller doesn't pay me, you're going to pay me XYZ. But when you work with someone who's a customer, when you're a client, I can pull comps, I can tell you, I know this area, I can tell you all the different things. Even with a customer, you cannot lie to them. You have to disclose to them if you know something, but you cannot treat them like a client. A customer, let me give you a good example of maybe somebody you'd work with a customer. How many of you, you don't have to yell out, but how many of you have had instances where you've worked with an attorney and they know everything, so therefore all they need you to do is fill in the blanks? Okay, that would be a customer. They feel like they can do their own comps on Zillow. They know all the legalese verbiage in here. They want to cross out things. You tell them, no, you can't do that. And they just don't really need you to do anything. Or maybe you have the listing, but the buyer calls you and they want to write a contract. So maybe they're the customer and your seller is the client. Your allegiance is to the seller as the exclusive, but you still give service to the customer by saying, I can show you the property, I can open the door, I can write the contract, I can give you information about the property that the seller allows me to give. But that's pretty much, am I missing anything, Tom? That's pretty much all you can do with a customer. Okay, but here's what happens. Oh, let me pull comps, let me tell you what you should do, let me tell you what you should offer, let me tell you this, let me tell you that. You're going too far. You're going too far. And that's why we've been given this form, because there are instances where my buyer doesn't want me to do anything, fill in the blanks. I call that transaction brokering or customer brokering. I didn't have to do anything. They found it. They called me and said, you know, I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to the contract. I need you to set it up. Great. My fee is XYZ for just that. I might not charge a full 3% because I didn't have to do anything but fill out the contract and make sure everybody gets to the closing table. So I charge based on my hourly rate. And if you don't know what your hourly rate is, read the MREA book and it will help you figure out what that looks like. And go to KW Command. And if you've been in the business at least a year with Keller Williams, you will have stats that'll show what your average commission is and your average sales price. And you can figure out what that hourly rate is by reading the MREA book. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
Thank you, Deborah, as always. So I just had this happen, and I'm sure I did not do this form, but I was a listing agent. I think I'm getting feedback. Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay, I was a listing agent, and then I had an investor who came to me, wanted to purchase, and he asked, could he give me the information to do the contract?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had already gotten clearance, as you instructed, with my seller to be able to be a dual agent to represent, if I needed to do both sides. I did not do this form though, but I just put what he said he wanted on the contract. He signed, seller signed, we closed with no problem. But even that instance is where I should have used this F-116.
Or you didn't have to use anything.
Because I didn't.
This is going to blow your mind. But see, did everybody hear what Willie just said? How many of you heard him? Raise your virtual hand if you heard him say dual agency. He wasn't in a dual agency. He was acting as a transaction broker and he was a customer. That's it.
Okay.
So on the other side of the form, it would have had seller, Keller Williams Brokerage. The other side could have been NA. That buyer is not being represented.
That's what I put.
Okay, but that's not dual agency. That's the language that you guys are using, and that's what's confusing you. Who cares whether you represent the other side? You have to ask them, do you want to be represented? If they tell you, no, it's not a big deal, I just need you to write the offer, then they're a customer. You're a transaction broker to them. You're still going to get both sides.
I did.
That doesn't change. So you just have to make sure you explain to your broker how you represented the buyer and how you represented the seller. But everybody's using the word dual agency. A dual agency is an agency. You wouldn't use that language. You wouldn't say it's dual agency.
Understood, because I'm not representing him.
That's right. That's
Got
right.
you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
All right, leasing, I'm not going to go into, but basically when you are doing a lease for a seller, there's a lot of other forms you want to add with this, like taking videos inside the home. We have a GAR contract or GAR form for that. Just know that when you're leasing a property, ask questions like, do you have a deposit? Do you have a lease? Get all that information up front. So when you have that person who may be an investor or you have, and they want to buy that property, and they want to continue to lease it, or if the seller is trying to find a tenant to put in there, ask all those questions. What's the deposit and all those kind of things. I think I'm finding that people are leasing, they're not doing paperwork, and then they're upset when they don't get their commission. Tenant brokerage, if you represent someone who's looking to rent, we have tenant brokerage. And guess what? It's the same thing as buyer brokerage. It's just the word tenant was changed. So that's why I'm not going through that. And guess what? You can work with a tenant as a customer as well. So you have both exclusive and then you have customer. Okay. So let's say they are a little upset with you and you're upset with them. And it's like, okay, I'm done with this. That's called mutual. Mutual means two or more. Okay. Uni means one. So in the event that the seller or buyer says, I want out, and it's mutual, then you would use this form. And oh, by the way, your protected period is over at this point. Okay. Your protected period is over at this point, or you could choose to say, I don't want my protected period to go away. All right. But usually if you fill out this mutual termination, it's probably mutual, you know. And so my script goes sort of like this when I'm working with someone that, oh, by the way, you are able to fire me, but also know that I'm able to fire you as well. And if you want to fire me, the feeling is probably mutual. Now, all of you can't say that. And some of you went, oh, I'm okay with saying it. That's not for everyone to say. But I'm just very firm and blunt with what I say. Okay, because I like to know up front. I don't want to play games. All right. And so if they can accept that, we can move forward with working together. If not, no problem. Did you know you had this form, and do you know how to use it? Questions?
Yes.
Okay, everybody's good on that. Someone needs me to share the handout link again. Let me do this one next slide, and then I'll do that. All right, unilateral. So we just did mutual, but then sometimes the client says, I want out. And you're going, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Here's the thing. Here's what I always find interesting when I get the call. You're telling me you've done all these things. Why is the person asking to be out of their brokerage with you? So for those of you that are in Midtown, you understand what I'm about to say because we've had this conversation. But for the others, you got to hold up the mirror and find out and be able to explain, why do they want out? What did you not do? Did you not explain forms? Did you not watch timelines? Did you, if you've done all these things, no problem. It could be the other side is trying to pull something tricky or whatever. But at the end of the day, if they ask to be out, and usually when I get the broker call, the seller or buyer will tell me everything you did not do. Now, I'm never going to throw any of you under the bus. I'm not going to say, well, yeah, no, I'm so sorry. That's a teaching moment. I'll give them a call and we'll talk about that. And I will also try to keep the transaction in the brokerage by asking them, will you allow me to sign someone else? That is the right of the brokerage, and that is the right of the broker, whether it's Tom, myself, or any of the other brokers in the other offices. And I have successfully been able to do that, and Tom has too. I've heard him talk about it. And what that means, what that looks like, if you're new and you don't know what I'm talking about, someone fires you, it's still, the brokerage is still with us. They just fired the licensee. And I might say, Willie, would you take this over? Willie says yes. He talks to that buyer or seller. They go, I like Willie. I'll go ahead and give you guys another chance. I will tell Willie, you get with James and you guys work out what the money is going to look like. because I don't want James to lose out just because the buyer, the seller was upset. That's just the way I broker. I don't know if that's done everywhere, but that's just the way I broker. Okay. But if they want out, they don't want anything to do with us because we've just mucked it up, then I have the right to go into the system and cancel their brokerage agreement or cancel their listing. And I don't like doing that. And neither does Tom. Because that's money out of your pocket and you should never put your brokerage in that situation. Okay? But there are instances where you're going, I'm okay, I want out. And if you notice, I've highlighted at the top of this page, it says termination by client. But guess what? At the bottom, it says termination by broker. You can fire them as well. Now, if the client fires you, there's also a section here on the other, on the mutual that says, and let me go back to that, that they might have to pay you for your time or your, let's say you've paid $600 for photography and maybe you pay for staging and all. That conversation needs to happen at the listing appointment or the buyer appointment. That if I've spent money on gas or I've spent money on staging, you can fire me, but I'm also going to need a check for $2,500 or whatever it is. Okay. So just make sure if it's mutual, you have the right to kind of recoup some fees. You may not need to or want to, but you do have that right on this form. And then as an agreement to work with the tenant as a customer, the mutual brokerage and the unilateral, it's just, we're breaking up. We're getting a divorce. I now pronounced you exclusive, but now we're getting a divorce. This is a divorce paper. Okay. Any questions about that? Now, if you haven't done this already, pick up your phone, go to YouTube and type in WEISSMAN PC and subscribe to this channel. WEISSMAN comes out he's not consistent, but I think it's turning out to be like every 2 weeks. Sometimes he puts more than one out in a week, but it looks like it's like once a month or every 2 weeks. And the videos are anywhere from 1.5 minutes to maybe 4 minutes. But it's usually just a snippet of our contract that he's talking about and making it very clear. There's probably about 60 videos on there now. And so if you've never subscribed to this, you may want to take some time while you're working on your computer or, working on your marketing and listen to his videos. You can just put it on a playlist and just listen to them in a loop. But if you haven't done that already, I would go ahead and subscribe because they're very good. They're very thorough. Every now and then again, I raise my eyebrow like, but for the most part, they're pretty good. Any questions? And I'm going to go ahead and put the handout in the chat for those that didn't get it. Any questions, comments, or anything else that you want to add in here?
Deborah, I have a question.
Go right ahead.
Hi. On the cancellation, or if a client wants to get out of a contract with you, is a text message okay, or do they need to send an email?
We talked about text messages many times on Broker Chat and in contract. Text message is not a form of communication in our real estate world. It's a form of communication for you guys to go back and forth on conversations, but any legal communication is not text. And the reason it's not a legal form is because there's nowhere to sign. There's no signature. There's nothing. Yeah, you have a date stamp and all that kind of stuff because you guys love to tell me, let me send you my entire text thread. And I usually will stop you and say, do not send me your entire text thread. Number one, I'm not going to look at it and it's not legally binding. So they can send an email. Yes. Can they write you a note? Yes. Can they send a fax if they still use a fax machine? Yes. Can they walk in the building, which we had someone do last week, and sit down with the team leader and say, I want out? Yes, they can do all of that. Text is not a form.
Great. All right, thank you.
Anybody else? And I just sent the handout again. Somebody's talking, but they're breaking up.
Oh, I have a bad connection.
If you want to put it in the chat, I can I can read it and then read it out to the group. Anyone else on the call have a question about agency? Very quick and dirty, but you've got the handout. You can look it over. I've highlighted things that you really need to read. How's everybody doing out there? The market has changed. It's, for those of you that work with buyers, it's probably a little easier to get something to look at and not feel threatened with 45 offers on it. Or is it just me? Just to confirm, customer agreement means we provide no guidance with regard to due diligence, financing, et cetera. You still want to explain the contract. You still want to explain all those things. And you use the right word, guidance. There's not a lot of guidance you have to do in a customer situation. When they start stepping over the boundaries of what your parameters are, you have to go back and remind them, I did a customer agreement with you, so I can only give you so much guidance. I can give you guidance on the contract. I can go over what happens if you breach the contract. You know, if you need a list of vendors and things like that, that's different. That's for my exclusive clients. That's not for my customers. Okay. Somebody said the market is better, but still challenging. I agree. Also, can we stipulate our fee in the special steps of customer agreements? Absolutely. I'm hearing that a lot more because gas is now a second mortgage. So therefore, people are asking people to pay retainer fees to say, you know, we've been riding around all day and I've used a whole full tank of gas and we're going out again tomorrow. And if you drive an SUV, I know that's at least $100 a day. Because I do. All right, anyone else? Good questions. Well, I won't keep you. I want to thank you for being here today. I have a couple other classes coming up. I'm not doing any contract classes. This is my birthday month. I'm usually taking off, but I'll be teaching shift this week, August 11th with Katie Shank from 12 to 4, I think. It should be fun because we'll make it fun. And then in the Peachtree Road, I'll be teaching MREI, which is the Millionaire Real Estate Investor. So, and then I'm off for a well-deserved birthday trip and vacation. So if anybody has any questions, and during that time, Tom will be helping Midtown. So if there's any questions or anything like that, let me know. Normally I take the month off, but this has been a weird month. So it didn't work out that way. No, I'm going to Oregon. I've never been there before, but there's a wedding we're going to. So I don't know what to expect when I get there. Trees, I guess. All right, any questions? Tammy's laughing at me. You better not be from Oregon, Tammy. I don't know. That's just not where I would say I'm going to Oregon. And I don't hike because I wear 4-inch heels. So that is not happening. But maybe they'll have a Jimmy Choo or a Christian Louboutin store there. I will frequent that. Anybody else? All right, you guys, go out there and sell some real estate. I'm sprinkling fairy dust on you to do plenty of business this month. And if you ever need me, you see my contact information here. dblue@kw is my broker email. I see people seem to be sending it to my team email, but dblue@kw is my broker. And of course, Tom, he's already gone, but he's your qualifying broker in the event you can't reach me. And I thank you guys for attending today. Thanks so much. Have a good day.